Rosa. The single word shattered Richard Blanchard's carefully orchestrated evening like a gunshot through crystal. His 8-year-old son Turner stood frozen in the center of the opulent dining room, his small finger pointing not toward any of the 4 immaculately dressed women seated at the mahogany table, but toward the corner where Rosa Madrigal quietly collected empty champagne glasses, her worn uniform a stark contrast to the silk and diamonds surrounding her. The silence that followed felt like a physical weight pressing down on Richard's chest. This wasn't supposed to happen. 4 months of planning, 3 private investigators vetting potential candidates, countless phone calls arranging this perfect evening, all of it crumbling because his son had just pointed to the help. Turner. Richard's voice came out strangled, barely above a whisper. Son, look again. Choose one of these lovely ladies. His hand gestured desperately toward the table where Victoria Ashford, Helena Pierce, Diane Rothschild, and Evelyn Cross sat in various stages of shock and growing indignation. But Turner didn't move. His brown eyes, so much like his late mother Sarah's, remained fixed on Rosa, who had gone completely still, a crystal glass trembling in her dark hands. What have I done? Richard's mind raced. The merger with Ashford Industries hung on Victoria's goodwill. Helena controlled 3 major media outlets. Diane's family owned half the real estate in the city. Evelyn's political connections could make or break his expansion into international markets. And his son had just humiliated all of them by choosing their cleaning lady. This is preposterous, Victoria hissed, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the Irish linen tablecloth. Richard, surely you're not going to entertain this mistake. Rosa's face had drained of all color. She set the glass down with shaking hands and took a step backward, her dark eyes darting between Turner and the fury building in the faces around the table. Senor Blanchard, I should go. No. Turner's voice cut through the mounting tension, startling everyone with its clarity. Papa, you asked me to choose a mama. I choose Rosa. She makes the best cookies, and she reads me stories when you're at work, and she doesn't yell when I spill things. Richard felt the room spinning around him. His son's innocent words were bullets aimed directly at the foundation of everything he'd built since Sarah's death 3 years ago. The companies, the connections, the careful social climbing, all of it threatened by a child's honest heart. Hey, my friend, hope you're doing well. Drop a comment and let me know how you're feeling about this story so far and where you are watching from. Some stories are too close to my heart to share on YouTube. I send those, along with little life lessons and surprises, to my email circle. If you'd like to be part of it, you can join with the link in the description. Helena's laugh was sharp as broken glass. Richard, this is either the most elaborate joke I've ever witnessed, or you've completely lost control of your household. She stood, her designer dress rustling like autumn leaves. I didn't fly in from London to be upstaged by domestic staff. Rosa was backing toward the kitchen door now, her movements quick and panicked. Please, this is all a misunderstanding. I'll just stay. The command came from Turner, not Richard, and something in the boy's tone made everyone freeze. Papa, you said you wanted someone who would love me like Mama did. Rosa already does. Richard's throat constricted. Sarah. God. How could he explain to his son that love wasn't enough? That securing Turner's future meant marrying someone who could protect the Blanchard legacy, not someone who earned $12 an hour and sent most of it back to family in Guatemala. But as he looked at Rosa, really looked at her, something twisted in his chest. She wasn't running away despite the chaos erupting around her. Instead, she was looking at Turner with such fierce protectiveness that it reminded Richard of a lioness guarding her cub. When had that happened? When had his son become her cub too? This is ridiculous, Diane snapped, her diamond earrings catching the chandelier light as she shook her head. Richard, I understand children can be unpredictable, but this display is becoming embarrassing for everyone involved. Embarrassing? Rosa's voice surprised everyone, including herself. She straightened, meeting Diane's condescending gaze head-on. What's embarrassing is 4 grown women fighting over a man who doesn't even know his own son's favorite bedtime story. The accusation hit Richard like a physical blow. Because she was right. He didn't know Turner's favorite story. He barely knew what his son had for breakfast most mornings, let alone what he dreamed about at night. But Rosa knew. Rosa had been there, filling the gaps Richard's ambition had created. Evelyn's laughter was cold and calculating. Oh, this is Rich. The help thinks she has an opinion. She turned to Richard, her political smile sharp as a blade. Richard, I think it's time to end this little experiment. Send the boy to his room and let the adults handle adult matters. Don't call him the boy. Rosa's voice had gained strength, anger overriding fear. His name is Turner, and he's the smartest, kindest child I've ever known. Maybe if any of you had bothered to speak to him tonight instead of treating him like a little prince who should be grateful for your attention, you'd understand why he made his choice. Turner beamed at Rosa's defense, his earlier nervousness evaporating. See, Papa? Rosa always listens to me. She helped me with my science project, and she taught me how to make pancakes, and she knows I don't like it when people talk too loud. Richard's world tilted on its axis. His son, his shy, sensitive son who barely spoke during board meetings and charity galas, was practically glowing under Rosa's protection. When was the last time Richard had seen Turner this animated, this confident? The deadline. The thought crashed through his emotional turmoil like ice water. The Ashford merger required signed papers by Monday. The Pierce Media deal needed finalization by the end of the week. Diane's real estate connections could make his resort expansion possible, but only if he played his cards right. And Evelyn's political backing was essential for the government contracts that would secure Turner's inheritance. But Turner's inheritance wouldn't matter if Richard lost his son in the process. Rosa makes me feel safe, Turner continued, oblivious to the complex calculations racing through his father's mind. Like Mama used to. The comparison to Sarah was a knife twist Richard hadn't expected. Because Sarah had made Richard feel safe too, in a way that millions of dollars and business victories never could. She'd seen through his armor to the scared kid from the wrong side of town who'd clawed his way to the top. Rosa had that same quality, that ability to see past the surface to what really mattered. Victoria stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I've heard enough. Richard, you clearly need time to teach your son about appropriate social boundaries. When you're ready to have a serious conversation about a suitable partnership, call me. As she strode toward the door, Richard realized with growing horror that this wasn't just about tonight. Word of this humiliation would spread through their social circles within hours. His reputation as a man who could control his own household would be in ruins. Business partnerships could crumble. Deals could fall through. But as he watched Rosa kneel down to Turner's level, her eyes filled with gentle concern despite the chaos around them, Richard felt something crack open in his chest. Something that had been locked away since Sarah's funeral. Mijo, Rosa said softly, using the Spanish endearment that always made Turner smile. This is very complicated for grown-ups. Your papa has many important decisions to make. But I already decided, Turner said with the simple logic of childhood. You take care of me and papa, even when he forgets to eat dinner. That's what mamas do, right? Richard's breath caught. He had been forgetting meals, skipping sleep, losing himself in work. But somehow, Rosa had been taking care of both of them without him even noticing. When had she started leaving his favorite coffee blend in the kitchen? When had she begun staying late to help Turner with homework? When had she become the steady presence that kept their house functioning like a home? Helena's voice cut through his revelation like ice. Richard, this woman has clearly overstepped her professional boundaries with your son. This attachment is entirely inappropriate. Inappropriate. Richard heard himself say, his voice stronger than he'd expected. What's inappropriate is that I've been so focused on building an empire that I nearly missed my son building a family. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Rosa's eyes widened, meeting his across the room. In them, he saw surprise, hope, and something else, something that looked remarkably like the love Turner had spoken about. But beneath her hope, Richard also saw fear. Fear of the women still seated at his table, fear of the power they wielded, fear of the impossible position she'd been thrust into. Rosa understood better than anyone how precarious her situation was. She had no wealth to fall back on, no powerful connections to protect her. If this went wrong, she'd lose not just her job, but her ability to support her family back home. The realization hit Richard like a freight train. His son hadn't just chosen a mother. He'd chosen the one person in the room who had everything to lose and nothing to gain, except the chance to love them both. And that choice was about to destroy all three of their lives. The mansion's silence after the women's departure felt heavy and suffocating. Richard stood in his dining room, surrounded by abandoned wine glasses and the lingering scent of expensive perfume, watching Rosa help Turner collect scattered silverware with the same gentle patience she'd shown through 3 years of invisible service. 3 years. Had it really been that long since Sarah's cancer diagnosis turned their world upside down? Richard's mind drifted back to that first day Rosa had appeared at their door, sent by the agency during Sarah's final weeks when they desperately needed help with 8-year-old Turner. He remembered being irritated by her broken English, impatient with her questions about Turner's routines. Sarah had been the one to see Rosa's potential, despite Richard's protests about hiring someone so inexperienced with children of Turner's caliber. "She has kind eyes," Sarah had whispered from her hospital bed during one of Richard's complaints. "Turner needs kindness more than credentials." Sarah had been right, as usual. But Richard had been too consumed with keeping his business empire from crumbling during his wife's illness to notice when Rosa evolved from temporary help to irreplaceable family cornerstone. Now, as he watched Rosa show Turner how to properly fold cloth napkins, a skill no 8-year-old needed but one she taught with patient grace anyway, Richard felt the weight of his own blindness. "Papa!" Turner's voice broke through his reverie. "Are you angry at me?" Richard knelt beside his son, guilt crushing his chest. "No, buddy. I could never be angry at you for being honest." He glanced at Rosa, who was pretending to focus intently on the crystal stemware. "But I need to understand something. When did Rosa become so important to you?" Turner considered this with the seriousness of a child who'd been forced to grow up too quickly. "Remember when you had to go to Japan for 2 weeks? Right after my birthday." Richard's stomach dropped. The Yamamoto deal. He'd flown out 3 days after Turner's 8th birthday party, leaving his son with Rosa and barely giving the arrangement a second thought. Business had been exploding, opportunities too valuable to miss. "Rosa stayed here the whole time," Turner continued. "She didn't just sleep in the guest room like other babysitters. She asked if she could sleep in the chair next to my bed because I kept having nightmares about Mama." Richard's throat constricted. He hadn't known about the nightmares. He'd been negotiating contracts while his son battled invisible demons in the dark. Rosa finally looked up, her dark eyes meeting Richard's with quiet defiance. "He was scared, Senor Blanchard. A child shouldn't cry himself to sleep." "You never told me," Richard said softly. "You never asked." There was no accusation in Rosa's voice, just truth delivered with the gentleness she showed everything in their house. "You were building something important for Turner's future. I was just taking care of his present." The simple statement hit Richard like a physical blow. While he'd been securing Turner's inheritance, Rosa had been saving Turner himself. "She taught me Spanish curse words," Turner added brightly, apparently unaware of the emotional landmine he'd just dropped. "But only the ones Abuela uses when she burns dinner." Despite everything, Richard found himself almost smiling. "Rosa has a grandmother." "Had," Rosa corrected quietly. "She raised me in Guatemala City after my parents died. Taught me that family isn't just blood, it's who shows up when you need them most." The words hung between them like a bridge Richard wasn't sure he was brave enough to cross. Because Rosa had shown up. Every morning at 6, every evening until Turner was asleep, every weekend when Richard worked through family time that should have been sacred. "Rosa makes breakfast like Mama used to," Turner said, sliding his small hand into Rosa's work-worn one. "She cuts my sandwiches in triangles and puts little notes in my lunchbox. And when I'm sad, she doesn't try to fix it with toys. She just sits with me." Richard's chest tightened. Sarah used to do that, sit with pain instead of trying to purchase solutions. It was a quality Richard had forgotten in his rush to solve problems with money and influence. But the tender moment shattered when Richard's phone buzzed with a text message. Then another. Then a rapid-fire succession that made his blood run cold. "Victoria, embarrassing display tonight. Reconsidering Ashford partnership. Helena, interesting evening, Richard. Expect coverage in tomorrow's society pages. Diane, your domestic situation requires immediate resolution before we proceed. Evelyn, political connections come with expectations of social stability." Richard's hands started shaking as he scrolled through the messages. His carefully constructed world was collapsing in real time. 3 years of relationship building, strategic positioning, calculated social climbing. All of it crumbling because his son had chosen love over leverage. "Papa!" Turner's voice seemed to come from very far away. "You look sick." "I'm fine," Richard lied, his mind racing through damage control scenarios. He could call Victoria, grovel, promise to rectify the situation. He could spin the story for Helena's media outlets, frame it as a charming misunderstanding. He could. "Senor Blanchard." Rosa's voice cut through his panic. "Maybe you should sit down." But Richard couldn't sit. Couldn't stop moving. Because standing still meant confronting the impossible choice his son had forced upon him. The woman who could secure their future, or the woman who was already living it. "Rosa," he said suddenly, his voice sharper than intended. I need to understand something. What exactly has been happening here while I've been working? The question came out wrong, suspicious, almost accusatory. Rosa's face shuttered immediately, her protective warmth replaced by the careful distance of an employee who'd just been reminded of her place. I take care of Turner, she said simply. Nothing inappropriate, Senor Blanchard. I would never. That's not what I meant. But even as Richard said it, he realized part of him had meant it. Because accepting that Rosa had become Turner's chosen mother meant accepting that Richard had failed as a father. And that truth was almost too painful to bear. Turner looked between them, confusion clouding his young features. Papa, why are you talking to Rosa like she did something wrong? Before Richard could answer, his phone rang. The caller ID made his stomach plummet. James Skline, his business partner and oldest friend. James, Richard answered, stepping into the hallway for privacy. Richard, what the hell happened tonight? James's voice was tight with concern. I've got 3 different sources telling me you let your kid humiliate Victoria Ashford and Helena Pierce in the same evening. It's complicated. Complicated doesn't begin to cover this. Do you understand what you've done? Victoria controls 40% of the construction contracts in this city. Helena's media empire could destroy your reputation overnight. And Evelyn Cross? She's got senators on speed dial. Richard closed his eyes, leaning against the wall. I know. Then fix it. Tonight. Call them, apologize, send the cleaning lady packing, and choose one of those women before this gets worse. Send Rosa packing. The words felt like poison in Richard's mouth. Richard, I've known you for 15 years. You didn't claw your way out of poverty and build a billion-dollar empire by choosing sentiment over strategy. Don't start now. The line went dead, leaving Richard alone with the weight of his oldest friend's ultimatum. James was right, of course. Richard had clawed his way up from nothing, making brutal choices that prioritized success over sentiment. It's how he'd survived his father's abandonment, his mother's early death, the foster homes that had taught him that love was a luxury poor kids couldn't afford. But then he'd met Sarah, who'd somehow convinced him that love and success weren't mutually exclusive. For 10 beautiful years, he'd had both. After her death, he'd retreated into the safety of pure ambition, telling himself he was securing Turner's future when really he was just running from the terrifying vulnerability of caring too much. When Richard returned to the dining room, he found Rosa packing cleaning supplies into her cart with mechanical efficiency, her movements sharp with barely controlled emotion. Rosa. Turner was hovering nearby, anxiety written across his young face. You're not leaving, are you? It's late, mijo. You should be in bed. But tomorrow's Saturday. You always make pancakes on Saturday. Rosa's hands stilled on her cart. We'll see. The simple phrase hit Richard like a gut punch because he heard what she wasn't saying. It depends on your father. Rosa, Richard said carefully. We need to talk. She straightened, her chin lifting with quiet dignity. Of course, Senor Blanchard. Should I wait in the kitchen? The kitchen. Where the help belonged. When had he started thinking of her as something more? And when had she started accepting it? No. Here is fine. Richard glanced at Turner, who was watching them with the intensity of a child who'd learned to read adult tensions for survival. Turner, why don't you go get ready for bed? Rosa and I need to discuss logistics. Turner's face crumpled slightly, but he nodded and headed toward the stairs. At the landing, he turned back. Papa, Rosa's going to stay, right? She's going to be my new mama like I chose. The question hung in the air like a prayer and a threat combined. Because Richard knew his answer would either destroy his son's trust or his own future. And he was beginning to realize there might not be a choice that saved both. Go to bed, Turner, he said gently. We'll talk in the morning. After Turner's footsteps faded upstairs, Rosa turned to face Richard with the same quiet courage she'd shown all evening. But now he could see the fear underneath. Fear of a woman who'd just watched her entire world shift on its axis. I never meant for this to happen, she said quietly. I know my place, Senor Blanchard. I never encouraged Turner to think of me as anything more than. Then what? Richard interrupted. Than someone who loves him. Rosa's breath caught. Love isn't always enough. The words echoed something Sarah used to say, and Richard realized with growing horror that Rosa understood the impossible position she was in better than he did. She knew that choosing her meant potentially destroying everything Richard had built. And she was prepared to sacrifice herself to save him from that choice. But as Richard looked at this woman, really looked at her, He saw something that made his chest tighten with possibilities he'd been too afraid to acknowledge. Rosa wasn't just kind to Turner out of professional obligation. She wasn't just competent and reliable. She was a woman who'd been quietly falling in love with their broken little family, just as they'd been falling in love with her. And that realization terrified him more than any business deal he'd ever negotiated. Because love, as Sarah had taught him, was the one thing that couldn't be controlled or calculated. It was the one force that could either save everything he cared about or destroy everything he'd worked for. And tomorrow, he'd have to choose which future he wanted more. Saturday morning dawned grey and unwelcoming, matching the knot of dread that had kept Richard awake all night. He'd paced his study until 3 a.m., running scenarios, calculating losses, trying to find a solution that didn't require choosing between his son's happiness and their financial survival. At 6:30, he found Rosa in the kitchen, already dressed in street clothes instead of her usual uniform. Her small suitcase sat by the back door like an accusation. "You're leaving." It wasn't a question. Rosa didn't look up from the pancake batter she was methodically mixing, Turner's Saturday tradition that she was apparently determined to fulfill one last time. "It's better this way, Senor Blanchard. For everyone." Turner doesn't think so. Turner is 8 years old. He doesn't understand that some dreams are too expensive. Rosa's voice was steady, but Richard caught the slight tremor in her hands. "I called my cousin Maria. She can start Monday. She's very qualified, has references from good families." "I don't want Maria." The words came out harder than Richard intended. Turner doesn't want Maria. Rosa finally met his eyes, and the pain there hit him like a physical blow. What Turner wants and what's best for him aren't always the same thing. "You taught me that." Before Richard could respond, the kitchen door burst open and Turner bounced in, still in his pajamas, grinning with the unstoppable energy of a child who believed yesterday's promises were today's certainties. "Rosa, are you making?" Turner stopped mid-sentence, his smile faltering as he took in Rosa's street clothes and the suitcase. "Why are you dressed like that?" Rosa knelt down to Turner's level, her professional composure cracking slightly. "Mijo, remember how we talked about how sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices?" "No." Turner's voice was small but fierce. "You said you'd be my mama. I chose you." "Papa said." "Your papa has important business to take care of," Rosa interrupted gently. "And I have family responsibilities too. My sister Esperanza in Guatemala. She needs help with her medical bills, and I can make more money working for a family in California." It was a lie, Richard realized with a start. A carefully constructed excuse designed to give Turner something to understand while protecting Richard from looking like the villain. Even in her sacrifice, Rosa was taking care of them both. But Turner wasn't buying it. "You're lying." His young voice carried a sharpness that reminded Richard painfully of Sarah's ability to cut through deception. "Adults always lie when they are going to hurt you." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Rosa's carefully maintained composure finally cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks as she reached for Turner. "Mijo, please understand." "I don't want to understand." Turner jerked away from her touch, his face flushing with the kind of rage that only comes from devastating disappointment. "I thought you were different. I thought you loved me." "I do love you," Rosa whispered, the words breaking on a sob. "That's why I have to go." Richard felt something fundamental shift inside his chest, a tectonic plate of emotion that had been building pressure for months finally giving way. Because watching Rosa sacrifice herself for his cowardice wasn't nobility. It was the same pattern that had defined his entire life, good people paying the price for his ambition. "No." Richard's voice cut through the emotional storm. "No, you're not leaving." Both Rosa and Turner turned to stare at him, hope and confusion warring in their expressions. "Senor Blanchard," Rosa began carefully, "the business consequences can go to hell." Richard moved closer, his decision crystallizing with each step. "I spent 3 years building walls around my heart because I was terrified of losing someone I loved again. But I was so busy protecting myself from loss that I nearly lost everything worth protecting." Rosa's breath caught. "You don't understand what you're saying. Those women, their connections, are worthless if I lose my soul in the process." Richard reached out tentatively, touching Rosa's tear-stained cheek. "Sarah would have chosen you too, you know. Not for your connections or your money, but because you see our son as more than an obligation." The moment stretched between them, fragile and electric with possibility. Rosa's eyes searched his face, looking for certainty he wasn't sure he could provide. But before either could speak, Richard's phone exploded with notifications. The first was a text from James. Check channel 7. Now. The second was a missed call from his publicist. The third was an email from Victoria Ashford with the subject line, contract termination. Richard's blood turned to ice as he grabbed the television remote, clicking to the local morning news. Helena Pierce's perfectly coiffed anchor was already mid-sentence, a photograph of Richard, Turner, and Rosa from last night's dinner displayed prominently behind her. Exclusive footage of billionaire Richard Blanchard's unusual approach to finding a new wife. Sources tell us that after inviting 4 of the city's most prominent socialites to compete for his hand, Blanchard's young son instead chose the family's domestic worker, creating what insiders are calling the most shocking social upset of the decade. The footage was clearly shot through the dining room windows, a violation of privacy that made Richard's vision blur with rage. Someone had been watching, recording, waiting for exactly this kind of scandal. The incident has reportedly cost Blanchard several major business partnerships. The anchor continued with barely concealed glee, with sources confirming that the Ashford construction deal worth an estimated $200 million has been terminated effective immediately. Rosa went completely white. Dios mío. $200 million. Richard felt the walls of his carefully constructed world collapsing in real time. The Ashford deal wasn't just money, it was the cornerstone of his expansion plan. Without it, the Pierce media partnership would crumble. The Rothschild real estate venture would dissolve. Evelyn's political connections would evaporate. But worse than the financial devastation was watching the hope die in Rosa's eyes as she fully grasped the magnitude of what choosing her would cost. I have to go, Rosa whispered, backing toward the door. This is exactly what I was trying to prevent. Rosa, wait. $200 million, Richard. Rosa's voice cracked on his name, the first time she'd ever used it instead of the formal address. That's more money than my entire family will see in 10 lifetimes. I can't let you destroy your son's inheritance for what? Richard stepped between Rosa and the door, his decision hardening into resolve. For love. For the woman who's been the only mother Turner's known for 3 years. For the person who's been holding our family together while I was too blind to see it. Turner had been silent through the news report, but now he moved to stand beside his father, his small hand slipping into Richard's. I don't care about money, Papa. I just want Rosa to stay. Mijo. Rosa knelt down again, her voice gentle despite her tears. You say that now, but when you're older, when you can't go to the college you want, or live in the house you love, or have the opportunities your papa worked so hard to give you. Then I'll work hard too, Turner interrupted with the fierce logic of childhood. Like Papa did. Like you do every day. Good people work hard for what they want, right? Rosa's sob was half laugh, half heartbreak. You beautiful, impossible boy. Richard's phone rang again. This time, an unknown number. Against his better judgment, he answered. Richard Blanchard. Speaking. This is Thomas Chapman from the Financial Tribune. I'm calling about the story that's about to break regarding your domestic situation. Would you care to comment before we go to print? Richard's grip tightened on the phone. The Financial Tribune wasn't gossip media, it was serious business journalism. If they were running the story, it would reach every investor, partner, and competitor Richard had ever dealt with. What story? Richard asked, though he already knew the answer. Sources close to your dinner party last night are reporting that you've been having an inappropriate relationship with your domestic employee, and that last night's display was part of an elaborate scheme to manipulate public sympathy for a relationship that violates multiple employment laws. The accusation hit Richard like a sledgehammer. Someone wasn't just reporting on Turner's innocent choice, they were spinning it into something ugly, something that could destroy not just his business relationships but Rosa's reputation and possibly her legal status. That's completely false, Richard said carefully, aware that Rosa was listening to every word. So you deny that Rosa Madrigal has been living in your home, caring for your son in a capacity beyond her job description, and that you've developed romantic feelings for her. The question was a trap, beautifully constructed. Deny it, and he'd be throwing Rosa away publicly. Confirm it, and he'd be admitting to the inappropriate relationship they were alleging. Richard looked at Rosa, who was watching him with the expression of someone waiting for the final blow to fall. He thought about Turner, who'd been brave enough to choose love over expectation. He thought about Sarah, who'd taught him that some things were worth more than money. And for the first time in 3 years, Richard made a choice with his heart instead of his calculator. Let me be very clear, Richard said, his voice gaining strength with each word. Rosa Madrigal is the most honorable, hardworking, and caring person I've ever known. If I've developed feelings for her, it's because she's been everything to my son that money can't buy and everything to our family that business success can't provide. Any suggestion of impropriety is not just false, it's an insult to a woman who deserves nothing but respect. The silence on the other end of the line was telling. Then, so you're confirming a romantic relationship? I'm confirming that Rosa Madrigal is going to be my wife. The words came out before Richard fully realized he'd made the decision. And if anyone has a problem with that, they can discuss it with my lawyers. Richard hung up, his hands shaking with adrenaline and terror and something that felt remarkably like freedom. Rosa was staring at him in shock. Richard, what have you done? Something I should have done last night. Richard moved closer, taking her hands in his. Rosa, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to choose love over leverage, or how to build a life instead of just building wealth. But I know that Turner was right. I know that you're already part of our family, and losing you would be the stupidest business decision I've ever made. But the money will come back, or it won't. But if I lose you, if I lose this chance, I'll spend the rest of my life regretting it. Richard's voice grew stronger as the truth settled into his bones. I can rebuild a business empire. I can't rebuild a broken family. Rosa's tears were falling freely now, but something had shifted in her expression. Hope beginning to bloom despite the chaos surrounding them. Are you sure? She whispered. Because once you choose this path, there's no going back. Your friends, your business partners, they'll never accept me. Then they were never really friends. Richard cupped her face in his hands, marveling at how right this felt despite how wrong everything else was going. Rosa, I'm about to lose everything I've spent 20 years building. The only question is whether I'm going to lose it for something worthwhile. Turner stepped forward, taking both their hands in his small ones. We're going to be a real family now. Richard looked at his son, his brave, wise, impossible son who'd seen what Richard had been too scared to acknowledge, and felt something unlock in his chest that had been frozen since Sarah's death. Yeah, buddy. We're going to be a real family. As if summoned by the emotional crescendo, Richard's phone began ringing again. This time, the caller ID showed Victoria Ashford. The point of no return stretched before them like a cliff edge. Once Richard answered that call, once he confirmed his choice publicly, there would be no calculating his way out of the consequences. But as he looked at Rosa, at the woman who'd been quietly loving his son when he'd been too busy to notice, who'd been holding their world together while he'd been trying to expand it, Richard realized that some cliffs were meant to be jumped off. Some choices were worth the fall. The phone kept ringing, insistent as a heartbeat. Richard looked at Rosa, at Turner, at the life they could build together if he was brave enough to choose it. Ready? He asked, his thumb hovering over the answer button. Rosa squeezed his hand, her grip strong despite her tears. Ready. And for the first time in 3 years, Richard chose love over fear, family over fortune, and faith over calculation. The consequences would be devastating. The choice would be worth it. Richard answered Victoria's call with the phone on speaker, Rosa and Turner flanking him like soldiers preparing for battle. Richard. Victoria's voice was actic, each syllable sharp enough to cut glass. I assume you've seen the news coverage. I'm calling to offer you one final opportunity to salvage this situation before it becomes truly catastrophic. I'm listening, Richard said carefully, though his hand remained firmly clasped in Rosa's. Announce that last night was a misunderstanding, that your son was confused and you were simply entertaining the media with a charming family moment. Apologize publicly to myself and the other ladies for any inconvenience. Send the woman away quietly, and we can discuss reinstating our partnership terms. Rosa started to pull her hand away, but Richard's grip tightened. And if I don't? Victoria's laugh was winter wind through dead leaves. Then you'll discover exactly how expensive principles can be. I have calls scheduled with the Yamamoto Group, Consolidated Banking, and Metropolitan Development, all of whom will be very interested to learn about your judgment issues. Richard's stomach dropped. Those weren't just business partners. They were the pillars holding up his entire financial structure. Yamamoto controlled his international manufacturing. Consolidated held the loans on his 3 major properties. Metropolitan owned the land his resort project was being built on. You're talking about a coordinated attack, Richard said slowly. I'm talking about natural market consequences when a business leader demonstrates unstable decision-making. Victoria's tone was pure poison disguised as professionalism. You have until 5 p.m. to announce your correction. After that, I can't control what happens. The line went dead, leaving them in silence that felt heavier than grief. Natural market consequences, Rosa repeated bitterly. She makes it sound like weather instead of warfare. Turner, who'd been listening with the focused intensity of a child who'd learned to decode adult crises, looked up at his father. Papa, what's a judgment issue? Richard knelt down to Turner's level, trying to find words that wouldn't terrify his son. Some people think that Papa made a mistake by choosing Rosa to be part of our family. But they are wrong, Turner said with absolute certainty. Yes, they are. But sometimes being right costs money. Turner considered this with the gravity of a child who'd already lost one parent and understood that adults' choices had real consequences. How much money? The question Richard couldn't answer, because he was only beginning to understand the scope of Victoria's threat. If she convinced his major partners to pull out simultaneously, it wouldn't just be expensive, it could be terminal. His phone buzzed with a text from James. Emergency meeting. My office. 1 hour. Bring lawyers. Before Richard could respond, Rosa's phone rang. She looked at the caller ID with confusion. It's my immigration lawyer. But I haven't spoken to him in months. Rosa answered cautiously. Hola, Senor Patterson. Even from across the kitchen, Richard could hear the tension in the lawyer's voice. Rosa, I need you to come to my office immediately. There's been some kind of complaint filed with Immigration Services. Something about employment violations and potential deportation proceedings. Rosa went completely white, the phone slipping from her suddenly nerveless fingers. Richard caught it before it hit the floor. This is Richard Blanchard. What kind of complaint? Mr. Blanchard? Sir, someone has alleged that Ms. Madrigal has been working outside the terms of her visa. Specifically that she's been providing childcare services that constitute an authorized domestic partnership. There's also a claim that she's been living in your home inappropriately. Richard felt rage building in his chest like molten steel. Who filed the complaint? The filing is anonymous, but it came with very detailed documentation. Photos, financial records, witness statements. Someone spent considerable time building this case. Richard looked at Rosa, who was shaking with the kind of terror that came from understanding exactly how precarious her situation had always been. One phone call, one complaint, and she could lose everything, not just her job or her place in their family, but her right to remain in the country she'd called home for 8 years. How long do we have? Richard asked. There's a hearing scheduled for Tuesday. 3 days. If the allegations are substantiated, Ms. Madrigal could be detained immediately pending deportation. Richard's mind raced. Tuesday. The same day his board meeting was scheduled to vote on the emergency restructuring that might save his company. The same day his loan payments to Consolidated were due. Everything was converging into a perfect storm designed to destroy them. We'll be there, Richard said, ending the call. Rosa was staring at the floor, her breathing shallow and rapid. They are going to send me back to Guatemala. No. Richard's voice carried more conviction than he felt. We'll fight this. We'll hire the best immigration lawyers. We'll. With what money? Rosa's question was quiet but devastating. You just lost $200 million. How many more millions are you willing to lose for me? Before Richard could answer, Turner stepped between them, his young face set with determination that reminded Richard painfully of Sarah. Rosa, remember what you taught me about bullies. Rosa looked down at him, tears threatening to spill. What did I teach you, mijo? That bullies pick on people they think can't fight back. But they don't know how strong we really are. Turner took Rosa's hand, then Richard's, linking them together. We're a family now. Families fight for each other. The simple truth from his 8-year-old son hit Richard like lightning. Because Turner was right, this wasn't just business warfare. This was bullying on a corporate scale, designed to force submission through fear. You're right, buddy. Richard squeezed both their hands. But first, I need to understand exactly what we're fighting. Richard's phone rang again. This time, his private investigator, Donald Parson. Richard, I've been monitoring the situation like you asked. We've got problems beyond what's been reported. How bad? Someone's been planning this for months. The photos from last night weren't opportunistic. They were taken with professional equipment from a predetermined position. Whoever did this had advanced knowledge of your dinner party and specifically positioned themselves to capture compromising footage. Richard's blood chilled. You're saying this was a setup? I'm saying someone wanted you to fail. The immigration complaint was filed this morning, but the evidence packet was assembled weeks ago. Someone's been watching your house, documenting Rosa's routines, building a case against her before she even knew she needed defending. Richard looked at Rosa, whose face had gone ashen. Who would do that? I have some theories, but I need more time to confirm. In the meantime, you should know that the media blitz isn't random either. 3 different news outlets received identical evidence packets this morning, all timed to hit during maximum viewership hours. The scope of the conspiracy was breathtaking. This wasn't just Victoria's revenge. It was a coordinated assault designed to destroy his business, his family, and Rosa's life simultaneously. There's more, Donald continued. I ran background checks on your dinner guests like you asked. Evelyn Cross has been shorting your stock for the past 6 months. Helena Pierce's media company has been quietly acquiring shares of your competitors. And Diane Rothschild just happens to be Victoria Ashford's silent partner in the construction company that would benefit most from your resort project failing. Richard felt the world tilting around him. They were never potential wives. They were business predators. It gets worse. Victoria Ashford has been in preliminary talks with Yamamoto Group about acquiring your manufacturing contracts. This whole dinner party, it was a trap. They needed you to publicly humiliate them to justify the coordinated business assault. Rosa was listening with growing horror. They used me. They used Turner. No, Richard said fiercely. They tried to use you. But they underestimated something crucial. What? They assumed I'd choose money over family. They built their entire strategy around the belief that I'd sacrifice anything to protect my business interests. Richard felt clarity cutting through the chaos like a sword. But they were wrong. His phone buzzed with another text from James, news getting worse. Meet me now or lose everything. Richard looked at Rosa, at Turner, at the life they could build together if they survived the next 72 hours. The smart play, the old Richard play, would be to cut his losses, send Rosa away quietly, and rebuild his empire on the foundation of strategic marriages and calculated alliances. But the old Richard had never felt the way Rosa's hand trembled in his when she was scared. Had never seen the fierce protectiveness in her eyes when someone threatened Turner. Had never experienced the quiet strength that came from being loved not for what he could provide, but for who he was underneath all the armor. James can wait, Richard said, surprising himself. Right now, we need to prepare for war. Rosa looked up at him. Richard, you don't understand what you're risking. If they destroy your business, Turner's inheritance will be worthless if I destroy his family to save it. Richard cupped her face gently, marveling at how natural the gesture felt. Rosa, I spent 3 years after Sarah's death building walls around my heart because I thought security meant never being vulnerable again. But you and Turner taught me something I'd forgotten. What? That the only real security comes from being loved by people who'll fight for you even when you can't fight for yourself. Richard's voice grew stronger as the truth settled into his bones. I don't know how we're going to survive this, but I know we're going to do it together. Turner beamed up at them. See, I told you families fight for each other. Before either adult could respond, the kitchen door burst open and James Skline stormed in, his usually perfect composure completely shattered. Richard, what the hell do you think you're doing? James's eyes swept over Rosa and Turner with barely concealed disgust. Do you have any idea what's happening to your stock price? What the board is saying? What the banks are threatening? James. Richard's voice carried a warning. Not in front of my family. Your family. James's laugh was ugly. Richard, this woman is about to cost you everything you've worked 20 years to build. And for what? Some misguided sense of romance. Rosa started to step back, but Richard moved protectively in front of her. Careful, James. I'll be as careful as your shareholders, who are demanding an emergency vote to remove you as CEO. I'll be as careful as Consolidated Banking, who's calling in your loans. I'll be as careful as... Stop. Richard's voice cut through James's tirade like a blade. Just stop. James stared at his oldest friend with something approaching disbelief. You're really going to do this? You're really going to choose her over everything we've built? I'm choosing love over fear, Richard said simply. Something I should have done years ago. James looked between Richard, Rosa, and Turner, his expression cycling through disappointment, anger, and something that looked almost like grief. Then you're choosing to lose everything. And when you do, when you're broken and wondering how it all went wrong, remember that you had a choice. James turned and walked out, the kitchen door slamming behind him with such force that the windows rattled. In the silence that followed, Rosa moved closer to Richard, her hand finding his with desperate certainty. I'm scared, she whispered. Good, Richard said, pulling her and Turner into his arms. Being scared means we have something worth fighting for. But even as he held them, Richard could feel the walls closing in. 72 hours to save Rosa from deportation. A coordinated business assault designed to destroy his empire. Former allies turning into enemies. The media painting their love story as a scandal. And somewhere in the shadows, puppet masters pulling strings with surgical precision, counting on Richard's love for his new family to be the weapon that destroyed them all. The war had begun, and Richard was no longer sure they could win. The next 48 hours blurred together in a haze of emergency meetings, frantic phone calls, and legal strategy sessions that stretched deep into the night. Richard had converted his home office into a war room, with immigration lawyers, business attorneys, and crisis management specialists working around the clock to stem the bleeding. Through it all, Rosa moved like a ghost through her own house, serving coffee to lawyers who were fighting for her right to exist in the only country that had ever felt like home. Turner, sensing the gravity of the situation despite his young age, had become unnaturally quiet, hovering close to Richard and Rosa as if his physical presence could somehow hold their fracturing world together. It was late Sunday evening when Richard found Rosa on the back patio, staring out at the garden she'd been tending for 3 years. She'd changed out of the dress clothes she'd worn to meetings all day and back into jeans and one of Sarah's old sweaters, a detail that made Richard's chest tighten with emotions he couldn't name. "The lawyers think we have a chance," Richard said, settling beside her on the porch swing Sarah had insisted on installing years ago. Donald found evidence that the photos were taken from the Henderson property next door. If we can prove surveillance harassment, it might invalidate the immigration complaint. Rosa nodded without looking at him. "And your business?" Richard's silence was answer enough. The stock price had plummeted 40% since Friday night. 3 major partners had already pulled out. The board meeting scheduled for Tuesday morning was beginning to look more like a corporate execution than a business discussion. "I've been thinking," Rosa said quietly, "about something my abuela used to tell me. She said that sometimes loving someone means letting them go before you destroy them." "Rosa, listen to me." Rosa finally turned to face him, her dark eyes shining with unshed tears. "I've been doing the math, Richard. Even if we win the immigration case, even if we prove the complaint was malicious, the damage to your reputation is already done. Your business partners don't care if I'm legal. They care that I'm not one of them." Richard reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers with desperate certainty. "I don't care what they think." "You should." Rosa's voice was gentle but firm. "Because it's not just about you anymore. It's about Turner's future. About the college fund you've been building, the trust accounts, the legacy you wanted to leave him. The only legacy that matters is showing him that love is worth fighting for." Rosa smiled through her tears, leaning into his touch when he cupped her face. "You beautiful, stubborn man. You're going to lose everything, aren't you?" "Not everything." Richard leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Not the things that matter." The kiss that followed was desperate and tender and tasted like tears and possibility. Richard poured 3 years of suppressed longing into it, all the nights he'd lain awake thinking about Rosa's smile, all the mornings he'd watched her care for Turner with the fierce gentleness Sarah would have loved, all the quiet moments when he'd caught glimpses of the life they could build together. When they broke apart, Rosa rested her forehead against his. "I love you," she whispered. "I've loved you since that first night when Turner had nightmares and you came home to find me sleeping in the chair by his bed. You looked so lost, so scared of failing him, and I just wanted to take care of you both. I love you too." The words felt like freedom and terrifying vulnerability all at once. "I think I've loved you since Sarah's funeral, when you held Turner while he cried and I couldn't figure out how to be a father without her. You saved us both, Rosa. You saved us before I even knew we needed saving." They sat in the growing darkness, holding each other against the storm that was coming, neither willing to voice the fear that this might be their last quiet moment together. In the distance, Richard could hear his phone ringing from inside the house, but for once, he ignored it. "Richard." Rosa's voice was soft but urgent. "Before this gets worse, before we lose everything, I need you to know something." "What?" "Whatever happens on Tuesday, whatever they do to us, this was worth it. Loving you, loving Turner, being part of this family, it was worth everything." Richard was about to respond when the patio door burst open and Donald Parson rushed out, his face pale with urgency. "Richard, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a problem. A big one." Richard's stomach dropped. "What now?" "I've been digging deeper into who's behind the coordinated attack, tracing financial connections, following paper trails. Donald's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. I found something. Something that changes everything. Rosa tensed beside Richard. What did you find? Donald hesitated, his eyes moving between Richard and Rosa with obvious reluctance. Richard, I need you to think carefully. Who knew about your dinner party? Who had advance notice of the guest list, the timing, the specific arrangements? My staff, my assistant, the catering company. Richard's voice trailed off as understanding began to dawn. Why? Because someone with intimate knowledge of your schedule, your security systems, and your personal relationships has been feeding information to Victoria Ashford's team for months. Donald pulled out his phone, showing them a series of financial transaction records. Someone's been paid a total of $200,000 over the past 6 months for what the bank records list as consulting services. Richard felt the world tilting around him. Who? Donald's next words hit like a physical blow. Dr. Elizabeth Warren. Your grief counselor. The woman you've been seeing every week since Sarah's death. The revelation landed like a bomb in Richard's chest. Dr. Warren, the therapist who'd helped him through the darkest period of his life, who knew every vulnerability, every fear, every detail about his relationship with Turner and his growing feelings for Rosa. That's impossible, Richard whispered. She's been helping me. She encouraged me to open my heart again, to consider remarrying. She encouraged you to consider remarrying the *right kind of woman, Donald corrected grimly. Think about it, Richard. Every session, every conversation about your future, she was steering you toward exactly the kind of strategic alliance that would benefit her real clients. Rosa had gone completely still beside him. She knew about me. She knew everything, Donald confirmed. Your work schedule, Turner's routines, Richard's emotional state. She knew he was developing feelings for you before he admitted it to himself. And she's been reporting every detail to the consortium that's been planning this takedown. Richard's mind raced back through months of therapy sessions, recontextualizing every conversation with devastating clarity. Dr. Warren's subtle suggestions about appropriate partners. Her gentle warnings about getting too attached to temporary household staff. Her encouragement to consider women who could support his position in society. She played me, Richard said, his voice hollow with realization. For 3 years, she played me. It gets worse, Donald continued. Dr. Warren was Sarah's therapist too, during her final months. She has access to every private conversation, every fear, every hope Sarah shared about you and Turner's future. The betrayal cut deeper than any business loss could. Because Dr. Warren hadn't just violated Richard's trust, she'd weaponized Sarah's memory, turned his dead wife's words into ammunition for the people trying to destroy their family. There's more, Donald said, his voice gentle with sympathy. The immigration complaint against Rosa? It includes detailed psychological assessments claiming that Rosa has been manipulating both you and Turner, using your grief and Turner's need for maternal figures to secure her position. Assessments based on information that could only have come from your therapy sessions. Rosa made a sound like she'd been physically struck. They're saying I planned this, that I manipulated Turner into choosing me. They are painting you as a predator, Donald confirmed reluctantly. Someone who deliberately targeted a grieving family and exploited their vulnerabilities for personal gain. The systematic destruction of Rosa's character was breathtaking in its cruelty. Not only were they trying to deport her, they were ensuring that even if she stayed, her reputation would be destroyed beyond repair. Richard felt rage building in his chest like molten steel. How long have they been planning this? Based on the financial records, since about 6 months after Sarah's death. They've been waiting for you to become emotionally vulnerable again, then positioned themselves to exploit whatever relationship developed. Donald paused, his expression grim. But Richard, there's something else. Something that might explain why they targeted you specifically. What? The night Sarah died, the accident that caused her to miss her chemotherapy appointment, it wasn't random. The delivery truck that blocked the hospital entrance, causing the traffic jam that delayed her treatment by 6 hours? It belonged to a company owned by Diane Rothschild. The words hit Richard like a physical blow. Sarah's death, the moment that had shattered his world and left him vulnerable to years of manipulation, hadn't been a tragic accident. It had been the opening move in a game that had taken 3 years to play out. They killed her, Richard whispered, the truth settling into his bones like poison. They killed Sarah to get to me. Rosa's hand found his, squeezing tight as tears streamed down her face. Because she understood what this meant. that loving Richard hadn't just put her in danger, it had made her part of a war that had started years before they'd even met. "We can't prove it," Donald said softly. "The delivery was legitimate. The traffic jam could be explained as coincidental. But the timing, the connections, the way everything lined up to create maximum delay." Richard couldn't breathe. Couldn't think past the realization that his wife's death had been orchestrated by the same people who were now trying to destroy the second chance at love she would have wanted him to have. "Richard." Rosa's voice cut through his spiral of rage and grief. "Look at me." He turned to face her, seeing his own devastation reflected in her dark eyes. "They want us to break," she said fiercely. "They want you consumed by anger and me destroyed by fear. They want Turner to lose another parent to grief." Rosa's grip on his hand tightened. "But we're not going to give them what they want. Rosa, they killed Sarah. They've been planning this for years. How do we fight people who are willing to?" "The same way Sarah would have," Rosa interrupted. "With love. With truth. With the knowledge that some things are worth more than money or power or revenge." Richard stared at her, this woman who was facing deportation and character assassination and the destruction of everything she'd built in America, yet still had the courage to talk about fighting back with love. "They underestimated something crucial," Rosa continued, her voice gaining strength. "They assumed that once you knew the truth, once you understood the scope of their betrayal, you'd retreat into anger and isolation like you did after Sarah's death. They're counting on you to push me away to protect me." "Maybe you should be protected," Richard said desperately. "Maybe I should." "No." Rosa's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "I'm not Sarah, Richard. I'm not going anywhere without a fight. And neither are you." Before Richard could respond, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Dr. Warren's number, a call that would have been routine just minutes ago, but now felt like a serpent offering poison. "Don't answer it," Donald advised. But Richard was already reaching for the phone, his decision crystallizing with each ring. "No. It's time to stop being reactive. It's time to start fighting back." He answered the call, putting it on speaker. "Dr. Warren." "Richard, I'm so glad you answered. I've been watching the news coverage, and I'm deeply concerned about your emotional state. I think we should schedule an emergency session to help you process." "Process what?" Richard's voice was deadly calm. "The realization that my therapist has been betraying my trust for 3 years. The knowledge that you've been feeding my private conversations to the people trying to destroy my family." The silence on the other end of the line was telling. "Richard, I don't know what you think you've discovered, but $200,000, Elizabeth. That's what they paid you to turn my grief into their weapon." Another pause. Then Dr. Warren's voice returned, stripped of its professional warmth. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, Richard. These people have resources and patience you can't imagine. The smart thing, the only thing, is to cut your losses and walk away from this woman before she destroys what's left of your life. Is that what you told them I'd do? Is that how you sold them your services? By promising you could predict my reactions?" "I helped you once," Dr. Warren said, her mask finally slipping completely. "After Sarah died, you were broken, useless. I put you back together, gave you the tools to function again. This is how you repay that help." Richard felt Rosa's hand tighten in his, anchoring him against the woman's manipulation. "You didn't put me back together, Elizabeth. You hollowed me out and filled the space with guilt and fear. But Rosa helped me remember who I used to be. The cleaning lady." Dr. Warren's laugh was sharp with disdain. "Richard, you're romanticizing a woman who's using your son to manipulate you. When this all falls apart, and it will, you'll come crawling back, begging me to help you pick up the pieces." "No," Richard said with absolute certainty. "I won't. Because this time, I won't be facing the fall alone." He hung up, his hands shaking with adrenaline and fury and something that felt remarkably like freedom. Rosa was looking at him with an expression of fierce pride. "So what now?" Richard turned to Donald. "What do we have? What evidence can we use to fight back?" "The financial records connecting Dr. Warren to the conspiracy. The surveillance evidence from the Henderson property. Phone records showing coordination between the 4 women before your dinner party." Donald paused. "It's enough to raise questions, but not enough to prove criminal conspiracy." "Then we need more," Richard said. "And we need it before Tuesday." As if summoned by the mention of their deadline, Richard's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Enjoy your last night together. By Wednesday, she'll be on a plane to Guatemala, and you'll be bankrupt. You should have chosen better." A friend asterisk. The message was a taunt and a promise and a declaration of war all at once. Richard looked at Rosa, at Donald, at the impossible odds stacked against them. Everything he'd built was crumbling. Everyone he'd trusted had betrayed him. The people he loved most were facing destruction because they'd chosen to love him back. But as Rosa squeezed his hand and met his eyes with unwavering determination, Richard realized something his enemies had failed to calculate. Desperation could be a weapon too. And he was about to become very, very desperate. "Donald," Richard said, his voice gaining strength. "I need you to find me everything, every financial record, every communication, every connection between these people and Sarah's death. I don't care what it costs or how long it takes." "Richard, they want to destroy my family. They killed my wife to set this in motion." Richard's voice was cold as winter steel. "Then they just made this personal. And they have no idea what a mistake that was." The war had entered a new phase. And Richard Blanchard was done playing defense. Monday morning brought no mercy. Richard woke on his office couch after 3 hours of fitful sleep, surrounded by legal documents that offered no hope and financial projections that painted a picture of systematic destruction. Rosa had insisted on staying in the guest room to maintain appearances for the lawyers, but through the walls, Richard could hear her moving restlessly, sleep as elusive for her as it was for him. By dawn, Donald had delivered the devastating truth. Despite 48 hours of investigation, they had circumstantial evidence but no smoking gun. The conspiracy was too well planned, the connections too carefully hidden behind legitimate business transactions and legal loopholes. "They've been playing this game for decades," Donald explained over bitter coffee in the kitchen where Rosa mechanically prepared breakfast for lawyers who barely acknowledged her existence. "Every move has been calculated to skirt the edge of legal exposure while maximizing damage." Richard watched Rosa serve coffee to the immigration attorney who was supposed to save her, noting how the man accepted her service without meeting her eyes. Even the people fighting for her treated her as less than human, a problem to be solved rather than a person to be protected. "The hearing is in 6 hours," the immigration lawyer said between bites of toast Rosa had made but wouldn't eat herself. "Our best strategy is to argue procedural violations in the complaint filing, but honestly, Mr. Blanchard, the evidence against Ms. Madrigal is substantial." "Fabricated evidence," Richard corrected sharply. "Perhaps. But proving fabrication requires more resources than we have and more time than we've been given." The lawyer's tone was professionally sympathetic but essentially hopeless. If Ms. Madrigal were to voluntarily agree to deportation, she could avoid detention and potentially reapply for visa status in the future. Rosa, who had been silent through most of the morning's strategy sessions, finally spoke. "How long would that take?" "Best case scenario, 3 to 5 years. If she has a criminal deportation on her record." The lawyer shrugged helplessly. 3 to 5 years. The number hit Richard like a physical blow. Turner would be 13 by then, a teenager who might barely remember the woman who'd been his chosen mother. Richard would be navigating adolescence alone, assuming he had anything left after the business warfare. "There has to be another option," Richard insisted. "There is," the lawyer said carefully. "If Ms. Madrigal were married to a U.S. citizen, particularly one with significant financial resources and community standing, it would complicate the deportation proceedings considerably." The suggestion hung in the air like a lifeline and a trap simultaneously. Richard's pulse quickened. Marriage would protect Rosa, give them legal standing to fight the immigration case. But his business lawyer, who'd been silent through the immigration discussion, chose that moment to deliver the killing blow. "Richard, I need to inform you that Consolidated Banking has accelerated the timeline for your loan repayment. They want $250 million by close of business today, or they are calling in collateral on all your properties." Richard's blood turned to ice. "That's impossible. We have until Friday. They are citing the morality clause in your personal guarantee agreement. Apparently, your domestic situation constitutes a character issue that voids the standard repayment schedule." Rosa went completely white. "How much money?" $250 million, the business lawyer repeated. "Money that Richard doesn't have liquid without selling assets that are currently unmarketable due to the media attention." Richard felt the walls closing in with mathematical precision. To save Rosa, he needed to marry her quickly. But marriage would only make the business situation worse, confirming every allegation about inappropriate relationships and poor judgment. To save his business, he needed to distance himself from Rosa, but that would leave her defenseless against deportation. "There's more," Donald said quietly, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Victoria Ashford's people have been busy over the weekend. They've contacted Turner's school, raising questions about his home environment. There's talk of a Child Protective Services investigation. The room went deadly silent. Rosa made a sound like she'd been physically struck. They can't take Turner, Richard whispered. They can if they build a case that his home environment is unstable or that the adults in his life are engaged in inappropriate relationships. Donald's voice was gentle but relentless. A child whose father is involved in an immigration scandal, whose primary caregiver is facing deportation charges, whose household is in financial free fall. Richard couldn't breathe. The conspiracy wasn't just targeting him and Rosa. They were weaponizing Turner's vulnerability, using the boy's love for Rosa as ammunition to destroy all three of them. They want him in foster care, Rosa said, understanding dawning in her dark eyes. They want you alone, broken, with nothing left to fight for. Before anyone could respond, Richard's phone rang. The caller ID showed Turner's school. Mr. Blanchard, this is Principal Stevens. I'm afraid there's been an incident with Turner this morning. Richard's heart stopped. What kind of incident? Some of the older children apparently saw the news coverage over the weekend. There was some unkind commentary about his family situation. Turner became very upset and got into a physical altercation defending Rosa's honor. Richard closed his eyes, picturing his gentle son, who'd never raised a hand in anger, driven to violence by other children's cruelty. Is he hurt? Physically, he's fine. Emotionally, Mr. Blanchard, I think you should come get him. And perhaps we should discuss having the school counselor evaluate whether this living situation is in Turner's best interests. The threat was politely delivered but unmistakable. Even Turner's school was being turned against them. I'll be right there, Richard said, ending the call. Rosa was already moving toward the door. I'm coming with you. Rosa, no, the immigration lawyer said urgently. Any public appearance together right now could be used against you at this afternoon's hearing. I don't care, Rosa said fiercely. That little boy is hurting because of me. I'm not hiding while he suffers. If you go to that school with Richard, you're handing them evidence of the inappropriate relationship they are alleging, the lawyer pressed. It could be the difference between staying in the country and immediate deportation. Rosa wavered, the impossible choice written across her face. Protect herself legally, or comfort the child she loved. Richard made the decision for her. Stay here. I'll handle the school. Richard. Rosa, please. One of us needs to survive this intact, and it has to be you. Turner needs. Richard's voice broke. If they take him from me, if I lose everything, he'll need you to fight for him. The truth hung between them like a sword. Richard was already planning for his own defeat. By the time Richard returned from Turner's school, the house felt like a tomb. Turner clung to him with desperate intensity, his young face blotchy from crying and marked with the emotional wounds that no 8-year-old should carry. The kids said Rosa was a bad person. Turner whispered against Richard's shirt. They said she was trying to steal our money and that you were stupid for loving her. Richard's rage at the children quickly transformed into fury at the adults who'd created this situation. Someone had made sure the story reached Turner's classmates, knowing the cruelty of children would become another weapon against their family. Rosa isn't bad, Richard said firmly. The people saying those things are lying because they are scared of how much good she brings to our lives. Are they going to take her away? Richard couldn't lie to his son, not anymore. They're going to try. Turner pulled back to look at his father, his brown eyes, so much like Sarah's, filled with a wisdom that broke Richard's heart. If they take Rosa away, will you get sick again like after Mama died? The question hit Richard like a sledgehammer. Because Turner remembered those dark months after Sarah's funeral when Richard had barely functioned, when grief and guilt had turned him into a ghost haunting his own life. I won't get sick, Richard promised, though he wasn't sure it was true. But Turner, I need you to understand something. The next few days are going to be very hard. People are going to say things about our family, about Rosa, about me. And some of those things might sound true even when they are lies. I know Rosa's good, Turner said with absolute certainty. I don't care what anyone says. Richard pulled his son close, breathing in the scent of childhood innocence that was being systematically destroyed by adult greed and calculation. I love you, buddy. No matter what happens, remember that I love you and Rosa loves you. And that's real even when everything else feels like it's falling apart. When they returned to the kitchen, they found Rosa staring at her phone with an expression of absolute devastation. What is it? Richard asked. Rosa looked up, tears streaming down her face. My sister Esperanza in Guatemala. She's been hospitalized. Her diabetes complications got worse. The doctors say she needs surgery, but... Rosa's voice broke. It costs $15,000. Money I don't have because I've been sending everything home to help with her medications. The cruel timing wasn't lost on Richard. Everything was converging to force impossible choices. Save Rosa or save the business, comfort Turner or protect legal standings, fight the conspiracy or help Rosa's dying sister. I'll transfer the money, Richard said immediately. With what account? Rosa asked bitterly. Your assets are frozen pending the Consolidated Bank investigation. Your credit cards are maxed from legal fees. The only liquid money you have left is Turner's college fund. The truth hit like a physical blow. To save Rosa's sister, Richard would have to raid his son's education fund, the one inheritance that might survive the business collapse. Do it, Richard said without hesitation. No. Rosa's voice was steel-wrapped in pain. I won't let you destroy Turner's future for my family's mistakes. Esperanza's diabetes isn't a mistake. My choice to fall in love with you was, Rosa interrupted, her words cutting deep despite their obvious untruth. If I'd kept my distance, stayed professional, none of this would be happening. Your business would be safe, Turner would be secure, and my sister would. Her voice broke completely. Richard moved toward her, but Rosa stepped back, creating distance that felt like an ocean. Rosa, don't do this. Don't let them turn you against us. Against you. Rosa's laugh was bitter as winter wind. Richard, I'm trying to save you. Can't you see that? Every moment I stay here, every choice you make to protect me, they use it to destroy another piece of your life. Before Richard could respond, the immigration lawyer burst through the kitchen door, his face flushed with panic. Ms. Madrigal, we have a problem. They've moved up the hearing to 2 o'clock, 1 hour from now. They are claiming emergency circumstances. Rosa closed her eyes, understanding what Richard was still processing. They were accelerating the timeline to prevent any last-minute legal maneuvering. There's something else, the lawyer continued reluctantly. The prosecution has produced a witness. Someone who claims to have observed inappropriate conduct between you and Mr. Blanchard over the past several months. Who? Richard demanded. Dr. Elizabeth Warren. She's prepared to testify that you, Ms. Madrigal, deliberately manipulated both Mr. Blanchard and his son using psychological techniques she allegedly taught you during joint family therapy sessions. The lie was so audacious, so completely fabricated, that Richard felt reality shifting around him. They'd moved beyond evidence into pure fiction, counting on Rosa's lack of resources to prevent her from fighting back effectively. Joint family therapy sessions. Richard repeated slowly. Rosa has never been to therapy with us. Dr. Warren claims you specifically requested her presence during sessions dealing with Turner's attachment issues, and that she observed Ms. Madrigal using those insights to deepen the boy's dependence on her. Rosa was staring at the floor, her shoulders shaking with the weight of understanding how thoroughly she'd been set up. Every kindness she'd shown Turner, every moment of genuine care, was being twisted into evidence of manipulation. It's over, Rosa whispered. They've thought of everything. Richard felt his world collapsing with surgical precision. In 1 hour, Rosa would face deportation based on lies he couldn't disprove. His business empire was crumbling under coordinated assault. His son was being traumatized by forces beyond their control. And somewhere in Guatemala, Rosa's sister was dying while they fought battles they couldn't win. The phone rang again this time. The caller ID showed the number for Child Protective Services. Richard stared at the ringing phone, understanding that answering it would initiate the final phase of their destruction. CPS would remove Turner from an unstable home environment. Rosa would be deported. Richard would lose everything that mattered while his enemies claimed the wreckage of his empire. Rosa reached for the phone. I'll answer it. No, Richard said, catching her hand. We're not giving up. Not yet. Richard, look around. Look at what loving me has cost you. Rosa's voice was breaking, but her resolve was hardening. Turner's inheritance, your business, your reputation, everything you spent 20 years building is gone because of me. It's gone because of them, Richard corrected fiercely. Because of people who killed my wife and manipulated my grief and turned my love into their weapon. And it will keep being their weapon as long as I'm here. Rosa pulled her hand free, stepping back with the decisiveness of someone who'd made an impossible choice. I'm going to Guatemala voluntarily. Today. Before the hearing. Richard felt the ground disappearing beneath his feet. Rosa, no. It's the only way to stop the damage. If I leave willingly, they can't use the deportation against you in the custody hearing. If I'm gone, the media story dies. If I sacrifice myself, maybe you can save Turner. The logic was brutal and sound and completely unacceptable. I won't let you do this, Richard said desperately. Rosa smiled through her tears, reaching up to touch his face one last time. You taught me something, Richard. You and Turner both. You taught me that real love means protecting the people you care about, even when it destroys you. Before Richard could stop her, Rosa moved toward the stairs. I'm going to pack my things. And then I'm going to say goodbye to Turner. And then I'm going to disappear from your lives before I destroy what's left of them. Richard stood frozen in the kitchen, surrounded by lawyers who avoided his eyes and legal documents that offered no hope. Through the window, he could see the media vans that had been stationed outside his house for 3 days, waiting for the final act of the tragedy they'd helped orchestrate. The phone stopped ringing, then immediately started again. This time, it was the bank. Then his board chairman. Then reporters who'd somehow gotten his private number. Each ring felt like a countdown to the end of everything he'd ever loved. And upstairs, the woman who'd taught him how to live again was packing to sacrifice herself for a love that had become too dangerous to survive. Richard closed his eyes and tried to remember what Sarah would have done, but for the first time since her death, he couldn't hear her voice through the noise of his own despair. The war was over, and he'd lost everything that mattered. Richard stood alone in his kitchen, listening to Rosa's footsteps overhead as she packed to leave forever, and felt something fundamental break inside his chest. Not his heart, that had been breaking steadily for days. Something deeper. Something that had been holding him together since Sarah's death through sheer force of will and stubborn refusal to surrender. The phones had finally stopped ringing. The lawyers had retreated to pack their files and bill their final hours. Even Donald had left to pursue leads that would matter to someone else's case now. The house felt hollow, echoing with the ghost of laughter and warmth that Rosa and Turner had brought to these rooms. In 1 hour, Rosa would walk out that door and disappear from their lives. By evening, Turner would likely be in foster care while CPS evaluated Richard's fitness as a parent. By morning, the bank would seize his properties and liquidate his assets. By the end of the week, he'd be exactly what his enemies wanted, broken, alone, and powerless. The realization should have devastated him. Instead, it sparked something unexpected, a cold, clear fury that burned away 3 years of careful calculation and strategic thinking. Richard pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in 15 years. Danny Castellanos. The voice was rougher now, weathered by years of police work, but still carried the same South Boston edge that had gotten them both into trouble as kids. Danny, it's Richard. A pause. Jesus Christ. Richard Blanchard. I saw you on the news, brother. You're in some deep shit. The deepest, Richard confirmed. Danny, I need a favor. A big one. You haven't called me since you left the neighborhood behind. What makes you think I give a damn about your problems now? The question was fair. Richard had abandoned his childhood friend when success started calling, choosing country club connections over loyalty to the kid who'd watched his back through foster homes and poverty. Because the people trying to destroy me killed my wife to get to me, Richard said simply. And they are about to deport the woman my son chose as his new mother. And in about 6 hours, they are going to take Turner away from me too. Another pause, longer this time. You're serious? Dead serious. Danny, these people have unlimited resources and political connections I can't match. But you know things they don't. You know how to hurt people who think they are untouchable. What exactly are you asking me to do? Richard closed his eyes, crossing a line he'd sworn never to approach. I'm asking you to help me fight dirty. 20 minutes later, Danny Castellanos walked through Richard's front door looking exactly like what he was, a veteran police detective who'd spent 20 years dealing with the worst humanity had to offer. His presence filled the house with an energy that made the crystal and marble feel suddenly fragile. So these are the people who think they are better than us, Danny said, scanning the opulent rooms with the same expression he'd worn as a kid studying the houses they'd never be invited into. Danny, meet Rosa Madrigal. Richard gestured toward Rosa, who'd come downstairs with her single suitcase, her eyes red but her chin raised with quiet dignity. Rosa, this is Danny. We grew up together before I forgot where I came from. Danny studied Rosa with the assessing gaze of someone who'd learned to read people's souls in interrogation rooms. You're the one they are trying to run out of the country. Sigh, Rosa said simply. And you love this stubborn bastard and his kid enough to sacrifice yourself for them. Rosa glanced at Richard, something shifting in her expression. I do. Danny nodded slowly. Then you're tougher than these rich bitches who think they can play games with people's lives. He turned to Richard. Here's what I found in 1 hour of digging that your fancy lawyers missed in 3 days. Danny pulled out a manila folder thick with documents. Dr. Elizabeth Warren? Your therapist? She's got a gambling problem. Owes about 300 grand to some very unfriendly people in Atlantic City. Guess who paid off her debts 6 months ago? Victoria Ashford, Richard said, though it wasn't really a question. Through about 6 shell companies, but yeah. Warren was bought and paid for before she ever started feeding them information. Danny flipped to another page. Helena Pierce's media empire? It's hemorrhaging money. The company's about 2 months from bankruptcy, which is why she needs your competitors' deals to survive. Richard felt pieces clicking into place. They weren't just destroying me for revenge. They needed my business assets. Gets better. Diane Rothschild's real estate portfolio is built on fraudulent property assessments. She's been inflating values and getting illegal loans based on fake appraisals. If that came out, she'd be looking at federal charges. And Evelyn Cross. Danny's smile was sharp as winter wind. Senator Cross's biggest campaign donor is under federal investigation for foreign election interference. She needed a public distraction, something to make her look tough on immigration issues. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Richard's destruction wasn't just profitable, it was necessary to cover their own criminal activities. Danny, Richard said slowly, please tell me you have proof. Better than proof. I have leverage. Danny pulled out a digital recorder. Turns out Dr. Warren recorded all your sessions. Patient confidentiality laws made the recordings inadmissible, but she's been selling copies to the highest bidder for months. Richard's blood chilled. My private sessions about Sarah? About Turner. Everything. Including sessions where you talked about Rosa, your growing feelings, Turner's attachment to her. They've been using your own words to build the case against you. Rosa made a sound of pure rage. They turned his grief into ammunition. But here's the thing, Danny continued. Warren got greedy. She also recorded conversations with Victoria Ashford, thinking she might need insurance someday. And those recordings, they detail the entire conspiracy, including references to Sarah's death. Richard felt the world shifting around him. You have evidence they killed Sarah? I have evidence they planned to delay her medical treatment, yeah. Whether they intended murder or just wanted to create vulnerability. Danny shrugged. That's for a jury to decide. For the first time in days, Richard felt hope stirring in his chest. What do you need from me? Nothing. This isn't your play anymore. Danny turned to Rosa. It's hers. Rosa looked confused. I don't understand. These people think they know you, Danny explained. Quiet cleaning lady, illegal immigrant, no resources, no connections. They've built their entire strategy around you being powerless. I am powerless, Rosa said quietly. Like hell you are. Danny's voice carried the authority of someone who'd seen real strength in unexpected places. You want to know what real power looks like? It's a woman who'll sacrifice everything to protect the people she loves. That kind of strength scares the shit out of bullies. Richard was beginning to understand Danny's plan. You want Rosa to fight back. I want Rosa to destroy them using their own weapons. Danny pulled out another file. See, while they were focused on Richard's business empire, they overlooked something crucial. Rosa Madrigal isn't just a cleaning lady. She's a documented victim of the conspiracy, with legal standing to file criminal complaints, civil lawsuits, and immigration counterclaims. Rosa stared at Danny like he was speaking a foreign language. I can't afford lawyers for something like that. You don't need to afford them. You need to survive long enough for the system to work. Danny's expression was grim but determined. Rosa, how do you feel about becoming bait? Before Rosa could answer, footsteps thundered down the stairs and Turner burst into the kitchen, his face flushed with excitement. Papa, I heard talking and I thought maybe. Turner stopped short when he saw Danny, then looked around at the adult's serious expressions. Is Rosa still leaving? The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything they'd been planning. Richard knelt down to Turner's level. Buddy, we're trying to figure out how to fight the bad people who want to hurt our family. Good, Turner said with 8-year-old certainty. Because I have an idea. What kind of idea? Turner pulled out his tablet, fingers flying across the screen with the technological fluency of his generation. I've been recording videos. Like, diary videos about Rosa and how she takes care of us and how happy she makes you. Richard's heart stopped. Turner, what? I posted them on YouTube, Turner continued proudly. Just like the kids at school do with their families. I wanted everyone to know how good Rosa is, so I made videos showing her helping with homework and making pancakes and reading stories. Danny was already pulling out his phone, searching YouTube. His expression shifted from confusion to amazement to something approaching awe. Kid, Danny said slowly, how many views do these videos have? Turner shrugged. A lot. People keep sharing them and saying nice things about Rosa. Danny turned his phone around, showing them the screen. Turner's homemade videos, simple recordings of Rosa's daily kindness, her gentle interactions with Turner, her quiet care for their household, had gone viral. Comments poured in from families around the world, sharing their own stories of immigrant women who'd become the hearts of their homes. 2 million views, Danny said, his voice filled with wonder. In 3 days, this kid has created a grassroots movement that completely undermines the narrative they've been selling. Rosa was staring at the phone in shock. People are defending me. People are celebrating you, Danny corrected, and demanding answers about why you're being persecuted. Richard felt something he'd almost forgotten, the sensation of hope taking root in his chest. Turner, you brilliant boy. You did what all our lawyers couldn't do. You told the truth. But even as relief flooded through him, Richard's phone buzzed with an urgent text from the immigration lawyer. Asterisk hearing moved up again. 30 minutes. Come now or forfeit. Asterisk. Danny's expression hardened. They know about the videos. They are trying to rush the hearing before public opinion can influence the outcome. Then we're out of time, Rosa said, reaching for her suitcase. No. Richard's voice cut through the resignation like a blade. We're done running. We're done being reactive. It's time to take the fight to them. Danny grinned, recognition flashing in his eyes. There's the kid from Saudi I used to know. Richard pulled out his phone and dialed Victoria Ashford's direct line. Richard. Victoria's voice was smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. I assume you're calling to negotiate Rosa's quiet departure before the hearing. Actually, I'm calling to give you one chance to withdraw all charges and dissolve the conspiracy before I destroy you. Victoria's laugh was genuinely amused. Richard, darling, you have nothing left to negotiate with. In 20 minutes, your cleaning lady will be in immigration custody. By tonight, your son will be in state care. By tomorrow, you'll be under federal investigation for conspiracy to commit murder. The silence that followed was profound. I'm sorry, what did you say? Dr. Elizabeth Warren recorded everything, Victoria. Every conversation, every plan, every detail about Sarah's death. And I have copies. That's impossible. Danny Costillanos sends his regards, Richard said, watching his childhood friend nod with savage satisfaction. You remember Danny, don't you? The police detective who's been investigating organized crime for 20 years? He's very interested in your business practices. Another pause. Then Victoria's voice returned, stripped of its cultured composure. What do you want? Everything withdrawn. Every charge, every complaint, every threat. Rosa's immigration case dismissed. Turner's custody concerns dropped. My business partnerships restored. And in exchange, Richard looked at Rosa, at Turner, at the family that had been forged in the crucible of their enemy's hatred. In exchange, I don't send Danny's evidence to the FBI, the IRS, and every major news outlet in the country. You have no idea what you're dealing with, Richard. These connections run deeper than you imagine. Then it's going to be a very interesting news cycle, Richard said calmly. Danny's already prepared press packets for the *Washington Post *, Financial Times and *60 Minutes Star. Something about organized conspiracy, political corruption, and the mysterious death of Sarah Blanchard. The silence stretched so long Richard thought Victoria had hung up. Finally, you have 1 hour to get to my office. Bring the woman. We'll discuss terms. The line went dead. Danny was looking at Richard with something approaching pride. Now that's how you fight dirty. Rosa stepped closer to Richard, her eyes shining with fierce admiration. Are you sure about this? Once we walk into that meeting, there's no going back. Richard took her hand, then Turner's, linking them together the way they'd been meant to be from the beginning. I spent 3 years being afraid of losing what I love. I'm done being afraid. Turner squeezed both their hands. We're really going to win. Richard looked at his son, the boy who'd been brave enough to choose love over expectation, whose innocent honesty had become their most powerful weapon, and felt the last of his fear dissolve into determination. Yeah, buddy. We're really going to win. Because sometimes the impossible choice wasn't between love and security. Sometimes the impossible choice was between staying safe and fighting for everything that made life worth living. And Richard Blanchard was finally ready to fight. Victoria Ashford's penthouse office occupied the top 3 floors of the Ashford Tower, a monument to wealth and influence that pierced the city skyline like a golden dagger. Richard had been here dozens of times for business meetings, charity galas, and strategic negotiations. But walking through those familiar marble corridors now, flanked by Rosa and followed by Danny, felt like entering enemy territory for the final battle. The elevator ride to the 47th floor was silent except for the soft hum of machinery and Turner's quiet humming, a nervous habit he'd developed since Sarah's death. Richard had insisted on bringing his son, understanding instinctively that Turner's presence would be their greatest weapon. These people had underestimated the power of innocence before. They wouldn't make that mistake twice. "Remember," Danny murmured as the elevator rose, "everything we say in there is being recorded. Victoria's too smart not to have surveillance, but she's also too arrogant to think we'd be prepared for it." Danny held up a small device that looked like an ordinary pen. "Counter-surveillance. Whatever she records, we're recording too." Rosa squeezed Richard's hand, her palm damp with nervous sweat. "I still can't believe we're doing this." "Neither can I," Richard admitted. 6 months ago, I would have found a way to negotiate, to compromise, to find a solution that let everyone save face. But they made one crucial mistake. "What's that?" "They made it personal." Richard's voice carried a cold certainty that surprised even him. "When they killed Sarah, when they targeted Turner, when they tried to destroy you, they stopped being business opponents and became something else entirely." The elevator doors opened to reveal Victoria's private reception area, where Helena Pierce, Diane Rothschild, and Evelyn Cross were already waiting. They'd assembled like a tribunal, each woman positioned to project maximum intimidation. But Richard noticed what they probably didn't, the carefully concealed panic in their eyes, the way they held themselves like people preparing to fight for their lives. "Richard." Victoria rose from her position behind the massive desk that had once belonged to her grandfather, the railroad baron who'd built the family fortune on the backs of immigrant workers. "I see you brought your entire household." The dismissive tone was calculated to sting, but Richard felt only clarity. "I brought my family." Victoria's gaze moved to Rosa, cataloguing her simple dress, her work-worn hands, her obvious nervousness. "Ms. Madrigal, you look tired." "She looks like a woman who's been fighting for her life against people who should know better," Danny said, stepping forward with the easy confidence of someone who'd faced down much more dangerous predators. Helena's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose slightly. "And you are?" "Detective Danny Costallanos, Boston PD. I'm here as a friend of the family and a very interested party in your business practices." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Evelyn Cross shifted uncomfortably, her political instincts recognizing the threat of law enforcement involvement. "This is highly irregular," Evelyn said carefully. "What we're discussing today is a private matter between business associates." "Murder is never a private matter," Danny replied conversationally. Diane Rothschild went completely white. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" Richard stepped forward, feeling the power dynamic shift in real time. "We know about Sarah. We know about the delivery truck, the conveniently timed traffic jam, the systematic delay of her medical treatment." "That's a very serious accusation," Victoria said, but something had flickered in her eyes. Not guilt, but calculation. "Do you have any proof of these wild claims?" Danny smiled, pulling out a digital recorder. "Dr. Elizabeth Warren was very thorough in documenting your conversations. Shall I play some highlights?" He pressed play, and Dr. Warren's voice filled the room, tinny but clear. The delivery delay worked perfectly. By the time she reached the hospital, the treatment window had closed. Richard was completely devastated, exactly as vulnerable as you predicted. Victoria lunged forward, but Danny pulled the recorder back with practiced ease. "There's about 6 hours of recordings like that. Very detailed discussions about psychological manipulation, asset acquisition strategies, and what you called emotional warfare." Richard watched the 4 women's faces cycle through shock, denial, and growing desperation. But it was Diane Rothschild who cracked first. "Victoria, you said it was just going to be business pressure," Diane said, her voice rising with panic. "You never said anything about murder. You said Sarah's death was a lucky coincidence that created an opportunity." "Shut up, Diane," Victoria snapped, but the damage was done. Evelyn Cross was backing toward the door. I was never part of any discussion about killing anyone. My involvement was strictly political. Your involvement was conspiracy to commit murder, Danny said pleasantly. Which, in case you've forgotten, carries a life sentence in this state. Richard felt a strange calm settling over him as he watched his enemies turn on each other. For 3 years, these women had seemed untouchable, their wealth and connections creating an armor of invincibility. But stripped of their coordinated facade, they were just people who'd made terrible choices and were now facing the consequences. What do you want? Victoria asked, her composure finally cracking completely. Everything, Richard said simply. Every charge dropped, every threat withdrawn, every business partnership restored. And Rosa's immigration status cleared permanently. And if we refuse? Danny held up his phone, showing a prepared email to what looked like a dozen news outlets. Then tomorrow morning, the world learns about the conspiracy that killed Sarah Blanchard and tried to destroy an innocent family for profit. You have no idea what you're dealing with, Helena said desperately. The connections we have, the people who rely on our organizations. Will survive, Richard interrupted. People like you always think you're irreplaceable, but the truth is, you're just parasites. Remove you, and the host organisms get healthier. Turner, who'd been quietly observing the adults' verbal warfare, suddenly stepped forward. Ms. Ashford. Victoria looked down at him with barely concealed irritation. What, child? I have a question, Turner said with the serious tone he used when asking about homework. Do you have kids? The question caught Victoria completely off guard. No, I don't. Do any of you? Helena, Diane, and Evelyn exchanged glances, all shaking their heads. That's what I thought, Turner said with the devastating logic of childhood. Because if you had kids, you'd know that trying to hurt someone's family makes you the bad guy. Always. The simple truth, delivered with such innocent certainty, hit the room like a physical blow. Richard saw something shift in Diane's expression, a crack in the armor of rationalization that had allowed her to participate in Sarah's murder. He's right, Diane whispered, tears starting to stream down her face. God help me, he's right. What have we become? Diane, Victoria started. No. Diane's voice cracked with emotion. I lost my own parents in a car accident when I was his age. I know what it feels like to be that lost, that scared. And we deliberately created that pain for a child because we wanted money. Evelyn was backing further toward the door. I was never supposed to be part of the violent aspects. This was supposed to be about political positioning. You were supposed to keep your mouth shut, Victoria snarled, her careful facade dissolving completely. All of you were supposed to stay the course until we finished what we started. What we started? Helena's laugh was sharp with hysteria. Victoria, you're talking like we're at war. This is a child and a cleaning lady. Why couldn't you just leave them alone? Because they represented everything wrong with Richard's judgment. Victoria exploded, 3 years of carefully controlled rage finally erupting. Sarah was weak, dependent, emotional. She made him soft, made him vulnerable. When she died, I saw an opportunity to shape him into the kind of partner who could be truly useful. Richard felt Rosa's hand tighten in his as the scope of Victoria's manipulation became clear. But then he started caring about the help, Victoria continued, her voice dripping with disgust. Choosing sentiment over strategy, love over leverage. Do you understand how dangerous that is? How it undermines everything we've built? What you've built, Danny corrected quietly, is a criminal conspiracy based on the systematic destruction of families. And that ends today. Victoria turned on him with fury that was almost feral. You think you've won? You think your little recordings and amateur blackmail schemes matter? I have connections you can't imagine, resources that make your evidence look like children's games. Actually, Danny interrupted, his voice carrying a strange satisfaction. There's something I haven't told you yet. He pulled out a second phone, this one showing a live video feed. See, while we've been having this nice chat, FBI agents have been executing search warrants on all of your properties. Financial Crimes Division, specifically investigating money laundering, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit murder. The color drained from every face in the room except Richard's, Rosa's, and Turner's. You see, Danny continued conversationally, Dr. Warren wasn't the only one recording conversations. Turns out, when you're running a criminal conspiracy, it's really hard to avoid federal surveillance. Especially when you're stupid enough to use electronic communications to plan murders. Victoria's legs seemed to give out, and she collapsed into her chair like a puppet with cut strings. That's impossible. We were careful. You were careful about local law enforcement. You weren't careful about federal agencies that have been tracking illegal political donations, tax evasion, and interstate conspiracy charges. Danny's smile was sharp as winter steel. Evelyn's foreign donor scandal? That put all of you on the FBI's radar 6 months ago. They've been building a RICO case that just happened to intersect with Sarah's murder. Richard stared at Danny in amazement. You knew. This whole time. You knew they were already under federal investigation. I told you I'd help you fight dirty, Danny said with a shrug. What I didn't mention was that fighting dirty sometimes means letting the federal government do the heavy lifting. Rosa was looking between them in confusion. So we didn't need to come here. We didn't need to confront them. Oh, we absolutely needed to come here, Danny said, holding up the pen-shaped recorder. Because now we have their confessions on tape, including Victoria admitting to orchestrating Sarah's murder. That's going to make the federal prosecutor's job much easier. As if summoned by Danny's words, Richard's phone buzzed with a text, * all warrants executed. 4 arrests made. Package complete. Agent Skline *. Agent Skline. Richard read aloud, then looked at Danny with growing understanding. Your brother. The FBI agent. Twin brother, Danny corrected. He's been working the financial crimes angle while I handled the local investigation. Turns out, when you coordinate properly, law enforcement can be almost as effective as rich people think they are. The sound of sirens was beginning to echo from the street below. Victoria moved toward her phone, but Danny stepped smoothly into her path. I wouldn't, he said gently. Obstruction of justice charges just make everything worse. Victoria collapsed back into her chair, her empire crumbling around her with mathematical precision. This is impossible. We planned for everything. You planned for Richard to be weak, Rosa said, surprising everyone with the steel in her voice. You planned for him to choose money over love, just like you would. But you never understood what kind of man he really is. Richard turned to look at Rosa, this woman who'd been willing to sacrifice herself to save his family, who'd faced deportation and character assassination with quiet courage, who'd seen the best in him even when he'd forgotten it existed. What kind of man am I? He asked softly. Rosa smiled, tears shining in her dark eyes. The kind who chooses love over fear. The kind who builds families instead of just empires. The kind worth fighting for. Before Richard could respond, the elevator doors opened and federal agents flooded the room with professional efficiency. Agent Skline, who looked exactly like Danny but with shorter hair and a federal badge, nodded to his brother with the casual acknowledgement of siblings who'd coordinated takedowns before. Ms. Ashford, Ms. Pierce, Ms. Rothschild, Ms. Cross, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, money laundering, and about 15 other federal charges. Agent Skline's voice was professionally neutral as handcuffs clicked around wrists that had never expected to wear them. Victoria looked up at Richard as the agents prepared to lead her away. You have no idea what you've destroyed. The businesses, the jobs, the charitable foundations. We'll be better off without you, Richard said simply. People like you always think you're irreplaceable, but the truth is, you're just obstacles to progress. As the women were led away, Helena turned back one last time. Richard, you've won today, but there are others. People with more power, more resources. Let them come, Richard said, pulling Rosa and Turner close. I'm not the same man who was afraid of losing what I loved. I'm the man who knows what's worth fighting for. When the elevator doors closed on the last of the federal agents, the penthouse fell silent except for the city sounds filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows. Richard, Rosa, Turner, and Danny stood surrounded by the wreckage of an empire built on cruelty and maintained through fear. So what happens now? Rosa asked. Danny pulled out his phone, showing them news alerts that were already breaking. Now, the story goes national. 4 prominent socialites arrested in conspiracy to commit murder. A grassroots movement supporting immigrant families. A love story that survived corporate warfare. Turner tugged on Richard's hand. Papa, are we safe now? Richard knelt down to his son's level, seeing Sarah's eyes looking back at him with trust and hope and the endless capacity for love that had created their family in the first place. Yeah, buddy. We're safe. And we're together. And that's all that matters. But as they prepared to leave the scene of their victory, Richard's phone buzzed with one final message. This one from an unknown number. * well played, Mr. Blanchard. But this was just the opening move. The real game starts now. A friend asterisk. Richard stared at the message, understanding that their victory had been complete but not final. Somewhere in the shadows, other forces were already moving, other conspiracies forming. But as he looked at Rosa, at Turner, at the family they'd fought so hard to protect, Richard felt only determination. Because love, he'd learned, wasn't a weakness to be exploited. It was a strength that made everything else possible. And he was ready for whatever came next. The war was over. The real battle, building a life worth defending, was just beginning. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows of the house that had nearly been lost, casting golden squares across the hardwood floors where Turner sat cross-legged, carefully arranging flower petals in a pattern only he understood. It was Saturday, which meant pancakes and lazy mornings and the kind of peace that Richard had once thought was a luxury he couldn't afford. "Mijo, if you use all the rose petals for decorating, there won't be any left for the ceremony," Rosa said gently, though her smile belied any real concern. She was wearing the simple white dress they'd chosen together, not a designer gown that cost more than most people's cars, but something that made her dark eyes shine with happiness. "There are plenty of flowers, Mama Rosa," Turner replied with the confidence of a child who'd helped plan every detail of the day. "Papa planted extra roses just for the wedding." Mama Rosa. The name had evolved naturally over the months, a perfect blend of respect for Sarah's memory and acknowledgement of the woman who'd stepped into their lives with such gentle strength. Richard had worried initially about how to honor his first wife while embracing his second chance at love, but Turner had solved that puzzle with the wisdom that children somehow possessed. "Mama Sarah is in heaven, but Mama Rosa is here," Turner had explained one evening when Richard had struggled to find the right words. "I can love them both because love doesn't run out like money does." From his position at the stove, Richard watched his family prepare for the small ceremony they'd planned in their backyard. Nothing extravagant, just Danny and his wife, Donald and his family, a few of Richard's employees who'd become genuine friends, and Rosa's sister Esperanza, who'd flown in from Guatemala for the occasion. The business empire Richard had spent 20 years building was gone, dissolved in the federal investigation that had followed Victoria's arrest. But from its ashes, something better had emerged. Richard Blanchard Construction now employed mostly immigrant workers, paid living wages, and built affordable housing instead of luxury resorts. The profit margins were smaller, but the satisfaction was immeasurable. "You know," Rosa said, moving to stand beside Richard at the stove, "I never imagined my wedding morning would involve making pancakes for my soon-to-be husband." "Do you mind?" Richard asked, though he knew the answer from the contentment in her voice. "I mind that you're better at pancakes than I am," Rosa teased, stealing a bite from the plate he'd just filled. "It's very damaging to my domestic reputation." Richard laughed, marveling at how natural this felt. The gentle teasing, the easy companionship, the way Rosa fit into his space as if she'd always belonged there. "I had a good teacher. Someone who showed me that cooking isn't about perfection, it's about caring for the people you love." The kitchen fell into comfortable silence, broken only by Turner's quiet humming and the sizzle of batter on the griddle. Through the windows, Richard could see the workers setting up white chairs in the garden Rosa had transformed from Sarah's formal rose beds into something warmer, more alive. Vegetables grew alongside flowers now, and there was a sandbox where Turner could play while Rosa tended her plants. Richard's phone buzzed with a text from Agent Skline. Final convictions came through. Victoria got life without parole. The others got 15 to 25 years. Justice served. 6 months of trials, testimonies, and legal proceedings had finally concluded. Dr. Elizabeth Warren had testified against her co-conspirators in exchange for a reduced sentence, providing the final pieces of evidence needed to secure convictions. The conspiracy that had killed Sarah and nearly destroyed their family was officially over. "Good news?" Rosa asked, noticing his expression. "The best," Richard confirmed, showing her the message. "It's really finished." Rosa nodded, but he caught the shadow that crossed her face, a reminder that victory had come at a cost they were all still processing. The months of trauma had left marks on all of them. Turner still had nightmares sometimes. Rosa still flinched when unexpected visitors came to the door. Richard still woke some mornings with the echo of fear that it had all been a dream. But they'd learned to carry the shadows together, understanding that healing wasn't about forgetting the pain but about not letting it define their future. "Papa." Turner looked up from his flower arrangements. "When you and Mama Rosa get married today, does that mean the bad people can never hurt us again?" The question was innocent but profound, touching on fears that Richard himself sometimes wrestled with in the quiet hours before dawn. It means we're stronger together than we are apart, Richard said carefully, kneeling down to Turner's level. And it means that no matter what happens, we'll face it as a family. Good, Turner said with satisfaction. Because families protect each other. The simple truth, delivered with 8-year-old certainty, made Richard's chest tighten with emotion. Because Turner was right, they had become a family forged in the crucible of their enemy's hatred, strengthened by trials that would have broken weaker bonds. Rosa joined them on the floor, taking Turner's hands in hers. Mijo, I want you to know something. When I marry your papa today, I'm not trying to replace your Mima Sarah. I'm trying to honor her by loving you both the way she would have wanted. Turner considered this with the seriousness he brought to important matters. Mima Sarah would have liked you, he said finally. She always said the best people are the ones who take care of others even when no one's watching. Richard felt tears prick his eyes. Because Sarah would have loved Rosa, would have seen in her the same strength and gentleness that had first drawn Richard to his late wife. How do you know what Mama Sarah used to say? Rosa asked gently. Papa tells me stories about her, and he keeps her pictures in his office, and sometimes I see him talking to them when he thinks no one's looking. Turner's matter-of-fact tone made the observation more poignant, not less. I think she's happy that we found you. Before Richard could respond, the doorbell rang. Danny's voice called through the house. Blanchard, you better not be getting cold feet, because I drove 3 hours to officiate this wedding. Turner scrambled to his feet, excitement overriding sentiment. Uncle Danny's here. Can I show him my flower decorations? Go ahead, buddy, Richard said, watching his son race toward the front door with the boundless energy of childhood joy. Alone in the kitchen, Richard and Rosa stood facing each other with the weight of everything they'd survived and everything they were about to promise. Are you ready for this? Richard asked, taking her hands in his. I've been ready since that first night when you found me sleeping in the chair by Turner's bed, Rosa said softly. I just didn't know if you'd ever be ready to let yourself be happy again. Richard thought about the man he'd been 6 months ago, driven by fear, controlled by the need to protect what he had rather than embrace what he could become. The conspiracy had tried to destroy him by exploiting his love for Rosa and Turner, but instead, it had taught him that love wasn't a weakness to be defended. It was a strength that made everything else possible. I love you, he said, the words carrying 6 months of fought-for certainty. I love the way you make Turner laugh. I love how you turn our house into a home. I love that you're brave enough to fight for us even when the odds seem impossible. I love you too, Rosa replied, tears shining in her dark eyes. And I love that you chose us over everything else, even when it cost you everything. They kissed then, gentle and sure, with the taste of maple syrup and the promise of forever. Through the windows, Richard could hear Turner's excited chatter as he showed Danny the garden preparations, could see neighbors gathering for the small ceremony that would officially make them a family. The business empire was gone, but what remained was worth infinitely more. A son who'd learned that love was worth fighting for. A woman who'd shown him that real strength came from vulnerability shared. A life built on truth instead of strategy, on connection instead of calculation. As they broke apart, Rosa smiled with the confidence of someone who'd faced her worst fears and emerged stronger. Ready to go get married, Mr. Blanchard? Ready to start our real life together, Mrs. Blanchard-to-be. They walked hand in hand toward the backyard where their friends and family waited, where Turner was proudly directing the final preparations with the authority of someone who'd chosen his own mother and watched his father find the courage to choose love over fear. The ceremony was simple, personal, perfect. Danny's words were funny and heartfelt, mixing police procedural humor with genuine emotion. Turner served as ring-bearer with solemn dignity, presenting the simple gold bands they'd chosen together. Rosa's sister Esperanza cried through the entire service, her recovery from surgery made possible by the man who was now officially her brother-in-law. But it was the moment when Richard and Rosa exchanged their personally written vows that captured the transformation they'd all undergone. Rosa, Richard said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his chest. 6 months ago, I thought love meant building walls high enough to protect what I cared about. You taught me that love means building bridges strong enough to reach what matters most. You didn't just save my son and me, you saved the best parts of who we used to be. Rosa's response was equally profound. Richard, you showed me that home isn't a place or a status, it's wherever your family chooses to build something beautiful together. You and Turner gave me a family worth fighting for, and I promise to keep fighting for it every day for the rest of our lives. When Danny pronounced them husband and wife, when they kissed as the small crowd cheered, when Turner launched himself into their arms for a 3-way hug that felt like the most natural thing in the world, Richard felt the last piece of his heart click into place. The reception was a backyard barbecue with music from Turner's playlist and dancing on the patio where Richard had first admitted he loved Rosa. As the sun set, casting golden light across their gathered friends and family, Richard found himself standing in almost the exact spot where 6 months ago, Turner had pointed to Rosa and changed all their lives forever. Full circle, Danny observed, joining Richard at the edge of the celebration. Almost, Richard replied, watching Rosa teach Turner's school friends a traditional Guatemalan dance while parents who'd once whispered about their inappropriate relationship now smiled and joined in. But better than where we started. How so? Richard considered the question, watching his wife, spin with infectious laughter while their son conducted an impromptu orchestra of children with wildflowers as batons. 6 months ago, I had everything I thought I wanted and nothing I actually needed, Richard said finally. I had money but no peace, success but no joy, security but no real safety. Now I have less of everything except what matters. And what matters? Richard's answer came without hesitation. This. Them. The knowledge that when the next crisis comes, and it will come, we'll face it together. As if summoned by his words, Richard's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Congratulations on your wedding. Enjoy this happiness while it lasts. Some games have more players than you realize. A friend. Richard showed the message to Danny, who frowned with professional concern. Same signature as the message after Victoria's arrest. Someone else is out there, Richard said, but surprisingly, he felt no fear. Someone who thinks they can use our happiness against us. Doesn't that worry you? Richard looked across the yard at Rosa, who was now dancing with Esperanza while Turner provided enthusiastic musical accompaniment on a toy harmonica. His wife caught his eye and blew him a kiss, her face glowing with the kind of joy that no amount of money could purchase. Let them come, Richard said simply. 6 months ago, I would have been terrified of threats to our security. But now I understand something my enemies never will. What's that? Love isn't a weakness they can exploit, it's armor they can't penetrate. And anyone who tries to threaten my family will discover that I'm not the same man who used to negotiate from fear. Danny smiled with the satisfaction of someone who'd watched his oldest friend finally remember who he was underneath all the protective layers. There's the kid from Southie who used to fight off bullies twice his size. Yeah, Richard said, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who'd found what was worth protecting. But now I'm not fighting just for myself. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Richard found himself alone with Rosa and Turner in the kitchen where this story had begun. Turner had fallen asleep on the window seat, exhausted from excitement and dancing, his face peaceful in the way that only children could achieve. Look at him, Rosa said softly, covering their son with the blanket Sarah had knitted years ago. So content, so secure. This is what we fought for. Richard nodded, understanding that everything, the business losses, the legal battles, the months of uncertainty, had been worth this moment of simple family happiness. Rosa, he said suddenly, do you ever wonder what Sarah would think of all this? Rosa considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. I think she'd be proud that you learned to choose love over fear. I think she'd be grateful that Turner has a family who fights for each other. And I think she'd be happy that her husband found a way to live again instead of just surviving. Richard felt the truth of those words settle into his bones. Because Sarah would have wanted this, would have wanted him to find joy again, would have wanted Turner to have a mother who loved him fiercely, would have wanted their family to continue growing instead of remaining frozen in grief. Thank you, he said simply. For what? For seeing the best in us when we couldn't see it ourselves. For choosing to fight when running would have been easier. For teaching Turner and me that families aren't just born. They are built by people brave enough to love without guarantees. Rosa moved into his arms, fitting against him with the ease of 6 months of shared battles and earned trust. We built something beautiful together, didn't we? We built something worth defending, Richard corrected. And tomorrow, we start building something worth living for. As they stood in their kitchen, their sanctuary, their beginning, their home, Richard felt the deep satisfaction of someone who'd finally learned the difference between having everything and having enough. His empire was smaller now, but it was built on solid ground. His family was smaller too, but it was forged from choices rather than obligations. And when the next threat came, because it would come, they'd face it the same way they'd faced everything else, together, with love as their foundation and truth as their weapon. Outside, the city sparkled with lights that had once represented ambition and conquest but now simply meant home. Inside, a man who'd learned to choose love over fear held his wife while their son slept peacefully, dreaming of flower petals and pancake breakfasts and families that fought for each other no matter what the cost. The war for Richard Blanchard's soul was over. The victory belonged to love. What did this story teach you about the power of choosing love over fear, and the courage it takes to fight for what truly matters? Sometimes we think security comes from building walls around what we have, but real strength comes from building bridges to what we need. Drop your thoughts in the comments about a time when love gave you courage you didn't know you had, and subscribe for more stories that will change how you see the world.